This is the podcast for Narrate Church. Narrate Church meets every Sunday at 9 and 11 a.m. at the Grand Street Theater in Helena, Montana. For more information, visit www.narratechurch.org.
Who leads student ministries and also leads the news, editing, filming, all that stuff. He's on his way back from Fairmont Hot Springs right now. It ended up being 27 students to 2 nights of water sliding at Fairmont, 1 day of skiing. Wow, I'm sorry, I'm trying to get my brain in gear. 27 students, 21 of whom were male, all of whom were sophomores or younger. So a good friend of mine was one of the leaders on the trip, and he sent me text immediately the first night. One of them was with all of the kids holding their ankles in their hands on their beds. He says, some of you are connecting these dots. Remember the blue flame thing when you were in middle school? So he says, this is what happens when you leave your room for 3 minutes. 5 junior hires rolled up in a ball on their bed, lighting their farts on fire. I don't know how medically sound that is or not, but anyway, they'll be back here this afternoon. So if you guys just welcome, we're a church that gathers and scatters, and this is what we mean by gather. We value, how about that band continuing to work hard? Was that fun? If you know one of those guys, can I just tell you to thank those guys? Some of you know that we're in a transition right now in terms of our staff leadership, and those guys just continue to work harder and harder every week. So if you know any of them personally, please go out of your way to pat them on the butt, kiss them on the cheek, tell them thank you, because they're going above and beyond. They all have 50-hour-week jobs, and yet they're pouring in lots of hours to lead you in that. So this is what we mean by gather. We value Sunday morning. We think it's still of vital importance when it comes to wrestling with who Jesus really is, and even when it comes to following him. Our hope is that this forms a common thinking about what it means to follow Jesus, or even a common conversation about what it means to follow Jesus. And yet we're constantly also trying to remind ourselves that this is the practice. It's pregame, if you will. It's preseason, and it's not that any of those things aren't important. It's that the real game starts when you step into your office place, when you step into your neighborhood. I mean, being a Christ follower or even thinking about being one, pretty easy in this context, right? We just drink coffee and smile and laugh at bad jokes. It's the other 6 days, that's where the work is. And so a friend asked me this week, Adam, how do you describe Narrate to people? And I thought, I failed you. Really? Like gather and scatter. We gather and scatter. And this is what we mean by gather, and then the other 6 days are what we mean by scatter. So if you're guests, there's also a table as you exit. We call it Guest Central, and the design of that is if you have any questions or would like to connect in any way, you can do that there. Dodgeball would be one expression of what we mean by scattering, and it's kind of a silly version of what we mean by scattering. It was an idea a few years ago where we thought, man, I wonder if in the midst of cabin fever, if we could gather a bunch of otherwise dignified adults together and play dodgeball against each other. And it turns out that there was a lot of interest in that, and that's grown from the first year. I think we were at like 17 teams, and then the second year we were in the 20s, and then last year we added a student realm, and I think there ended up being 44 teams, and then this year we've added a middle school bracket as well, so the hope is to pack out the Capitol High gym and play dodgeball for a few hours. It'll be a blast. If you don't want to play, that makes you chicken. Also might make you smart, because Narrate has never represented well at this tournament. I think we're 0 for life. Not quite, but anyway, we've worked hard this year to identify other ways that we can really allow you to be involved, and we hope to do a really good job with concessions this year. So if you want to be a part of the tournament that day but don't want to play dodgeball, there's opportunities that way. You can check those out on the app. There's an email link on there, or you can go to the website or stop by Guest Central. Now, last week we started this series that we're calling Finding Your Balance. And what we said last week is that perhaps, really we started this series because we recognize that everybody likes to come to church and talk about money, and so we thought, man, we just came off of a sex series, let's just keep the home runs going and talk about money next. And I mean, by Easter it'll be church in Adam's living room. So what we said is, like, let's talk about money. And man, I have had way too much caffeine, I can't even begin to balance this thing. Okay, there we go. What we said last week was that perhaps if we could appreciate what goes into the laws of physical balance, we should have done like Gallagher and given the front row like those plastic sheet that they lift up in case I launch this thing, because I keep fearing that I'm going to do that and catapult it into the crowd. What we said is perhaps that if we understood the laws of physical balance, we could better appreciate what goes into accomplishing financial balance in our lives. And last week we said there are really 3 laws of physical balance. The first one is you got to have a reference point. In the case of balancing this pole, it's the top of the pole. It's why I can't do it throughout the sermon, though I've tried to figure out how, because I would have a stiff neck and you would be annoyed and my irises would be burned by the lights. But in the case of balancing this pole, it's staring at the top of the pole. If you've ever stood on top of someone's shoulders, on top of someone's shoulders, on top of someone's shoulders, and it wasn't at a sorority party, that means it was a cheerleading competition, which means that you just find a spot in the crowd and you just stare at it to balance it. This is embarrassing how terrible I am doing. See, because the second law is you got to make constant corrections. That if you're going to balance something, you've got to constantly be making corrections, which means if you just try to stand still and you don't try to make corrections, you can't do it. Back a step, I forgot. So last week in that whole reference point thing, what I suggested to you is that when it comes to accomplishing financial balance, the reference point is you got to know where your money's going, which in one sense is insulting because it's so simple, and yet in another sense it's arduous because it's a lot of work. And what I suggested last week was, what if you created a spreadsheet on your computer or a piece of paper in your back pocket, or you ordered an account on, say, mint.com or through Quicken, and you just tracked every expense for a week. Pretty basic, but really what we're saying is, hey, if you want to balance your money, you better first know where your money's going. Second point is that constant corrections thing. And I've got a video for you about constant corrections. Some friends and I saw this at a conference a couple years ago, and I thought it might be engaging.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our Catalyst stage, the Red Panda Acrobat. Give her a big hand.
Any red pandas in the house? I just want you to know, those of you that know me will appreciate this, because I was there with my friend Joe and Lenny, I was in about the second row of that 11,000 person conference. It was fantastic. I would have preferred to be in the nosebleed, but anyway, so next week what we're going to start talking about is this idea of constant corrections, that when it comes to financial balance as it relates to spending and saving and giving and making money, we have to be making constant corrections. This morning I want to talk about the third law, and the third law says that if you're going to accomplish balance financially, then you've got to have a clear objective. Obviously here the point is to keep the pole vertical, or as we said last week, if the officer draws the white line on the asphalt and tells you to walk it, the goal becomes to go home in your car, not their car. If you've ever crossed a creek by way of a log or a plank, the goal is to get to the other side of the creek while remaining dry. The question that I want to ask this week is, as it relates to making money, as it relates to saving money, as it relates to spending money, scripturally speaking, what's the goal? What's the one thing? Like, as it relates to all things money, what's the clear objective? I mean, if someone were to ask you and maybe push you a little bit, what's the goal? When it comes to money, when it comes to making money, when it comes to saving and spending money, what is the goal? Some of you perhaps might say, well, I don't know, I've never really thought of that, but I guess it's to provide for my family, which I think on the surface is it's a commendable goal. Providing for your family is important. And yet I would argue that if you begin to deconstruct that answer a little bit, it gets pretty vague pretty fast. Like, what are we talking about, provide for your family? Are we talking that it's your obligation, that it's your moral obligation to provide for your kids' college, or just to provide a roof over their head? And what kind of roof over the head, like an apartment or a 6,000 square foot house? And what kind of cars are you supposed to provide for them? Is it your job to provide a car for your kid, or is it their job to provide a job for themselves and provide a car for themselves? Like many of us, I think of my generation, were raised by these men who took a lot of pride in providing for their families, and that is a fantastic goal. And yet, if it's the clear objective, I think you can see that very quickly what happens is you become out of balance, because it's not all that clear. Some of you might say, well, my job then would be to make as much money as possible. And I think that's a good goal too. I mean, that making money is important, and perhaps in our current system, we demonize the person who is about making money far too much. Making money is valuable. But again, you know as well as I do that if that's the only goal, that gets ugly pretty quick. You get out of balance pretty quick. If a person really lives with making money as their only goal, what will their marriage look like? What condition will their kids be in when they leave the house? I mean, relationally, that person is certain to be a mess, right? Maybe you'd say, well, my goal then is to save as much money as possible. And if that's you, then you're not very fun to live with, right? I mean, that's just the facts. And if you're single, you're going, I'm lots of fun to live with. Well, you just wait. Your day's coming. Because you too will not be very much fun to live with pretty soon. Again, saving, it's important. It's a part of balance. But if left all by itself, it's not enough. I wonder, Andy Stanley, who I'm indebted to for this series, it's a series he did a couple years ago, and I've learned a lot from it and just decided that we would pillage it around here. He makes the observation that if people from another planet observed the way many of us lived our lives, they would probably suggest that our goal as it relates to money is to spend as much as possible. Now, nobody would write that down. No one's thinking like, my goal is to spend as much money as possible. And yet I think he makes a good point that if you have a lot of consumer debt, that's your goal. Like if you're carrying lots of debt on credit cards and cars and you're constantly annually spending more than you make, then the most honest way to say it is your goal is to spend a lot of money, because it's not saving it and it's not making it and it's not giving it. It's not planning for the future. It's to spend a lot of money. Obviously, that'll lead to all kinds of issues with imbalance. Some of you might consider yourself much more conservative financially, maybe even students of Dave Ramsey, and I myself have the utmost respect for what he's teaching. And perhaps what you would say is my goal is to be financially free. And again, I would argue that looks really good at the surface. But I know, we've heard stories of people who were, for all intents and purposes, were financially free, and yet squandered their wealth with almost no effort. You know people who had you've heard the stats of the number of how athletes file bankruptcy within a few years of retirement and all those different things. You know as well as I do that if just saying I want to be free, it's not clear enough. Maybe the problem is it doesn't give you a moral compass. It doesn't give you a grid through which to run all things financial decisions. And so this morning, I really just want to open the scriptures because my perspective here is, yes, it's God's word, but maybe even more specific, it's the record of men and women who have had the same goals that you have sitting in these chairs. They wanted to know God. Many of them wanted to obey God. They wanted to become like God. They wanted their character to become attuned to his character. They had your goals, and thus the answers, so to speak, are they inspired? I think they are. Are they from God? I think they are. But even if you don't believe that, you don't have to die on that hill. The fact of the matter is there are people with your goals who had your experiences who can say, hey, 3,000 years ago, hey, 1,000 years ago, or not 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, here's the way we thought. Here's what we felt like God was telling us. So what I want to do is I want to go to the scriptures and just ask this question. What's the one thing? Like, what's the clearly defined goal? What's the moral compass? What's the grid through which we can run all of our money? Our spending of money, our making of money, our inheriting of money, our receiving of money back from the government, our giving of money to the government. Like, what is the one thing, our Christmas gifts, every aspect of our financial reality, our saving, our giving, what's the one thing that we can run that through? What's the compass? Now, I got to warn you that the answer isn't going to be anything new. In fact, if you were raised by grandparents who went to church or your parents went to church, I guarantee you've heard something like this in the past. And we could really go to any number of different scriptures to find it. But where I want to go this morning is to the Old Testament. In particular to the book of 1 Chronicles, which means we're going to go to a text that's 3,000 years old. I think that has some weight. It means that 3,000 years ago, this guy we're going to look at, his name is David, the second king of Israel. He was wrestling with some of these same issues, and we're going to get to learn his thoughts, which means this isn't Adam's thoughts. It means it's not modern Americans' thoughts. This is a guy from a different context and a different culture who they say had a heart for God. Here's the way he thought about it. Now, as you try to find 1 Chronicles, let me kind of set it up. I've already said that this was 3,000 years ago, and the context of 1 Chronicles, if you're unfamiliar with the Bible, is a history book in the Old Testament. And by and large, what it records is the history of King David and his experience as king. And at this particular juncture where we're going to step into the book, David, his kingdom is at relative peace. Most of his battles have been won. Most of his enemies have been subdued. The kingdom it's at this place where it's kind of the envy of the surrounding nations. Things are going well. Finally, they have buildings. They're not wandering around the desert anymore. They have walls. They have a city. They have like stuff. And David, we don't know, like, was he sitting in his kingdom? Was he praying? What was going on? But it seems to have occurred to him as he was taking in the fact that here I am, king of this incredible nation, this nation that is incredibly wealthy, this nation that is now, it doesn't have any enemies, or at least any active enemies who are coming after us. People are a little bit intimidated by us. They're kind of at bay a little bit. Here I am in my palace, and God is in a tent. And we don't know, like, does he look out his window and does he see the tabernacle? And the tabernacle it's ancient jargon for a tent, really. I mean, the Egyptians would have had their tabernacle for Pharaoh, but when Israel came out of Egypt, God said to them, you're going to build me a tabernacle, but it's not going to be a king who dwells in the tabernacle. It's going to be me, the king, who dwells in this tabernacle. And as you travel along, you'll take it with you. And then when you stop, all these different people will set up around it. I know it's a very sad story, but all these different people will set up around the tabernacle. And when you go again, they'll pack up the tabernacle and boom, they'll head out the door. And so this has gone on for years. In fact, inside the tent is something called the Holy of Holies, and inside the Holy of Holies is something called the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the Covenant is a big wooden box overlaid and inlaid with gold. And inside this wooden box are the 2 stone tablets from Moses. And it represents the Holy of Holies. I mean, this is where God dwells. And so everywhere they went, the Ark of the Covenant went. Everywhere they went, the tabernacle went. When they stopped, everybody stopped, and they set up this tabernacle. They put the Ark of the Covenant in there, and there they had their deal. Well, now they're settled. They're in this city. They have homes. They have physical space. And David goes, weird. I live in a house. God lives in a tent. Now, if you're a guest with us, I just want to pause here, because what I said last week is there's no gotcha in this series. We're not gearing up for a capital campaign. We're not talking about a budget shortfall. Like, I don't want anything from you in this series. I'm not setting anything up by referencing that story. But here's what happens. David says, God, I want to build you a house. And God says, that's a fantastic idea, David. You're not qualified. You're a man of war. You have blood on your hands. You've killed people. You can't build me the house. Your son Solomon, perhaps he can build it. You can't. Now, David doesn't say what I would have said in that instance, like, I thought you loved me. That's not fair. He didn't suck his thumb. He didn't do any of those things. He didn't say, like, well, God, all I was doing was obeying you when I was killing those people. After all, you remember, you called me to be king, right? He didn't do any of that. He said, okay, well, here's what I'll do then, Lord. To me, it speaks to the interactive relationship David had with God. He says, how about I'll just set the stage. I'll collect the money. I'll hire the architects. I'll lay the plans. We'll get ready. And then all that has to happen is someone has to knock me off, and then they can build the temple. And God says, okay, we'll do that. And so David, first and foremost, he hires the architects. He gets the guys involved that are going to be in charge of designing what would come to be known as Solomon's Temple, which would be one of the ancient wonders of the world. He then goes to Israel's bank account, and he logs onto the website, and he transfers a whole bunch of money from their national treasury into this account specially designated for the temple. He then goes to his own account, and that the Bible says that he leveraged hundreds of pounds of his own gold and silver. One guy I heard say that they valued it up to $14 billion worth of gold and silver that David took from his own bank account and set it aside for the building of this temple as well. He then went to the people and he went, hey, guys, we've got this remarkable opportunity. We can build God his first temple. And they get all jazzed and fired up, and so they do that. And so where we're gonna step in is where David, he's celebrating, they're commemorating this moment where all of this money is in this account. The plans are rolled up, the CAD drawings are done, everything's there. Again, they just need some, I don't know, they need David to die or someone to knock him off, and then the temple will be built. And so he's celebrating and worshiping this with his people. And in this, I want to argue, we see David's answer to the question. What's the one thing? What's the grid through which I view my stuff? I think we see in this God's answer to the question. So if I can get from 2 Chronicles 29 to 1 Chronicles 29, I will read. So David says, we're going to work through this fairly methodically, but it won't take us super long. Verse 10 says, David praised the Lord in the presence of the whole assembly. Praise be to you, Lord, the God of our father Israel, from everlasting to everlasting. Now what follows, in my opinion, is a summary of what he prayed. I think that he probably prayed longer than this. What we're getting is the cliff notes of here's the message that he communicated to God, to himself, and to the people. Yours, Lord, is the greatness and the power. Not unlike Jesus' prayer, commonly referred to as the Lord's Prayer, Jesus starts by saying, Lord, this is all about you. This event, these resources, this pile of money, this idea of building you a temple, everything on earth, he says, Lord, it's about you. And the glory and the majesty and the splendor. Again, just emphasizing this, Lord, it's not about us, it's about you. And here's one of his punchlines, I think. For everything in heaven and on earth is yours. See, David makes a note to himself and verbalizes it for himself and prays it to God, and I think says it to the people, God, all the money represented here, it's yours. Everything on the earth, Lord, it's yours, and I'm aware of that. I am confessing that to you. Yours, Lord, is the kingdom. You are the exalted head over all. In other words, I'm David, I'm the king of this great nation, but God, I recognize that even though I'm king, your boss. You're the leader. He continues, wealth and honor come from you. You are the ruler of all things. So not only does everything belong to God, everything, David says, that we receive comes from you. I mean, it all is yours. It all comes from you when we receive it. In your hands are strength and power to exalt and give strength to all. In other words, what David is saying here is all the wealth, all the honor, all the power I've ever experienced, God, I'm recognizing in this moment that comes from you. Everything I've ever achieved, everything I've ever earned, you gave me the capacity to achieve it. You gave me the capacity to earn it. He continues. Well, never mind. Let's stop there. Go back. Sorry, Jamie. Because I think for me, maybe this is me projecting, but here's where I struggle. I recognize that it's all God's. I recognize that he has the power. He distributes it. I also have a kind of a little bit of a twitch when it comes to that because I recognize that that's theology that can be abused. You know what I mean? Like okay, so can't you just picture being one of David's buddies and David going, David, okay, I can appreciate what you're saying, but listen, I was there for the last few decades. I was there. I watched how hard you worked. I watched how much you sacrificed. I watched you pour out your own blood, your own sweat, your own energy. Yes, I understand that what you're saying is God made you king, but David, could we also just be honest and recognize you've worked really hard? And quite frankly, you're a pretty unique dude, and not everybody could pull off what you pull off. You know what I mean? There's this tension there where David is saying, God, it came from you. And I think David would say to his buddy at that point, yeah, I know. It's confusing. And I can't totally explain how I've received it. I understand that work plays into it. I understand there's this weird, unexplainable equation there. But I'm telling you, the older I get, the more I understand that everything I've been given to by God. That everything I've received is His and He's given it to me. I think this represents what a friend of mine always calls a you got to pay your fee type of moment. Because I can appreciate the person who goes, I just don't buy it. Like, stop praying and go find a job. I appreciate that mentality. I appreciate the tension of those two. I think ultimately, though, you got to pay a fee. You got to make a choice, so to speak. Does it all belong to God? And at the end of the day, in ways you can't fully explain, He distributes ability and resource and success and intelligence or not. David seems to pay that fee. He's going, God, I don't get it. I can't explain it, but everything belongs to you. Everything is distributed by you. Everything comes from you. And then he continues, now our God, we give you thanks and we praise your glorious name. But who am I and who are my people that we should be able to give as generously as this? He's in this moment of gratitude. Lord, here I am standing at this particular spot in history. This particular spot in history only happens once. Here I am. I get to be the one to leverage the resources and lead the people to leverage the resources to build you this great temple. Lord, this is grace. I don't deserve this. And then he finishes this way. Everything comes from you, and we have given you only what comes from your hand. That's like your grandma told you this, right? There's nothing new here. What David is saying is it all is God's. It all comes from God's. And I think there's the key. What's the clear objective when it comes to our finances? I think there's the key. And I love the way Andy Stanley summarizes. He uses two words: honor God. You want to know what the one key thing is when it comes to all your making, all your spending, all your giving, all your saving of money? Honor God. Honor God. Honor God with everything. That seems to be what David's observing here. God, it's all yours. I'm going to honor you with all of it. Now, if you're someone that was raised in church, I think you have a disadvantage on this subject. If you're someone that's been following Jesus for a while and you've taken your obedience very seriously and therefore you've been a giver and you've even been a tither, a 10% giver, I think you have a disadvantage too. Because I think what traffics into our brain, what filters into our brain is a thinking that says, my job is to honor God with 10%. The rest, I get to do whatever I want. Right? I mean, some of you, when you were a little kid, if you got $1, you gave a dime. Some of you are doing this with your kids now. They get $10 for their birthday. They give you $5. They get to keep $5. Just kidding. I mean, after all, they should help pay for the water, right? Just kidding. They get a $10 bill for their birthday. They get $9. $1 goes to God. They get $100 bills. They get 90. You get 10. Some of you, when you got your first job, and there was $1,000, you knew 100 goes to God. And it's about that point where you start puffing your chest out and you go like, I am a legitimate giver. I now give things with 2 zeros after them. It's a big deal. Then you get 10,000. And you go, ooh, wow, $1,000, now we're talking real money, right? This is why we see, nationally speaking, that giving statistics begin to trail off from a percentage basis at this point. Because what are you going to do with a dime? Buy an Airhead? But $1,000, $10,000, you can do some things with that. Now here I think is where you're at a disadvantage, though, because what can happen is we go, now don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of percentage giving. I think that God operates in that realm, but if we're not careful, what we say is, when God starts talking to us about the other 90 is, hey, whoa, God, I gave you your 10%. Now get off my back about I mean, come on, Lord. Like, how many people do you really know that even give you 10%? I mean, I know lots of people talk about it, but I actually give you 10%. So you go bug somebody else. I can do whatever I want with the 90. Isn't that kind of the way it can go? Now here's where it gets messy. I challenge you. And as I said to someone this week, I think if you open the Bible to prove me wrong, I think that's a win. But I challenge you, find it in the Bible where God defines honoring him with your money by saying, give me a percentage. I can't find it. But what you see in the Bible is God saying, honor me with all of it, with everything. Think of it this way. My wife and I, because of a friend, we drive a 2002 Suburban. We bought a year ago with about 125,000 miles on it. Now, before we bought that Suburban, we drove a 2001 Dodge Caravan with 455,000 miles on it. It's actually like 198,000 miles. And we have 3 little boys, and we like to do stuff outside. And with the van, not only does the steering wheel do this, but when we would go to do anything other than just travel to a city, like if we wanted to camp, like we knew where every nook and cranny was in that thing. Some of you families know exactly what I'm talking about. Like if we're going to fit sleeping bags and tents and skis and all that stuff. I mean, the poor kid in the back seat had this leaning tower next to him, and the glove box had a sleeping bag in it, and the console. I mean, you're with me, right? So when we got the Suburban, I mean, this is like, whoa. I remember one time my wife referenced some technology that it had, and I was like, okay, Teresa, that technology is about as old as 2002, so don't be too excited about that. We love it. Now, think of it this way. Actually, the students took it to Butte this weekend. Now, if you ask me, or if Caleb asked me, hey, can we borrow the Suburban? What percentage of the Suburban do you suppose that I expect them to take care of? Do you think I'm thinking like, as long as the driver's seat's cleaned off and, the quarter panel's wiped clean, then we're good. Just trash the rest of it. Just, that's about 10%. Just cover the driver's seat, cover the front quarter panel. We'll be good. No, it's ridiculous, isn't it? I'm thinking you want to honor me by taking care of my Suburban? You take care of 100% of it. What if that's the way God thinks about our stuff? Now, again, I understand that percentage giving is a part of his deal, but let's just push that aside. What if God isn't saying, pay me off with the percentage? What if he's saying, honor me with all of it? With the making, with the saving, with your salary, with your inheritance, with your retirement, with the birthday check, with you honor me, and not just the money, but with the stuff. You honor me with all of it. What if that's his attitude? Or think of it this way. I didn't understand this when I got married, but I have a greater appreciation for this now because I'm going to watch 3 little boys take some precious princess from some poor father and make him his wife. I have a higher appreciation for what happens to guys like my friend Dan who have to give their daughters away now, right? What I understand now is when I stood at the altar some 12 years ago, like I was saying my vows to Teresa and to Bob, her dad. Right? I mean, there's Teresa, but there's Bob in the front row, and I'm making equal promises to her, right? You fathers of dads? And what do you suppose he's sitting there in the front row thinking, like, well, especially when I say, like, because we all say something like to honor and to cherish. Do you think Bob's thinking, I wonder what percentage of my daughter he's going to take care of? Well, as long as he feeds her, that's close to 10%. I mean, we'll be good after that. No, he's thinking all of her, every bit of her. What if that's God's attitude? And isn't that what God says in the text? Is I gave it to you, it's my stuff, you get to manage it. You get to take care of it. Now, I understand that this can get a little freaky. This can even feel a little threatening. And some of you are going, whoa, wait a minute here. Like, it's hard enough to live off of 90. It's hard enough to live off of whatever percentage you're given. This gets freaky. Listen, if this freaks you out because you begin to think like, wait, God's going to take more, then you understand God differently than the scriptures represent him. Like if this freaks you out because you think God is going to reach in and take something from you, then your God is too small. He's like this big. Like if God needs something from you, does he have to ask? And that's silly. Like your God is too small, or he's like 5'7", 135 pounds, and every time he wants something from you, he's got to wrestle you for it. Doesn't make theological sense, right? It's not who God is represented as. And secondly, if this freaks you out a little bit, listen, we talked about this a lot last week. God doesn't want anything from you as it relates to your money. Jesus never once asked for money. And you go, Adam, why do you? And I went through this last week because I'm not Jesus, so that's a different conversation. But Jesus didn't ever ask for money. He doesn't want anything from you. He wants something for you. He doesn't want to get your money. He just doesn't want your money to get you. And for at least 3,000 years, men and women have recognized, who have journeyed after the heart of God, this is a big deal. Nothing, Jesus says, there's God or money. Not God or Satan, God or money. Nothing, Jesus argues, and if you think like I do that Jesus is the most intelligent person ever to live, which means he understood morality and ethics better than anyone else does, then what he said was nothing gets in your way of living the right kind of life and being the right kind of person more than money. This isn't about God taking anything from you. Now, I understand the next step is, okay, so what do I do? Give me the law, give me the principle, give me the one thing. I don't have it. All I know how to do is steal, and Andy Stanley has this remarkable prayer that he talks about. He says, just pray this. God, show me how to honor you with everything I have. That's the application, I think. God, show me how to honor you with everything I have. For some of you, God might talk to you about giving more. For some of you, God might go, you know what, you're very generous, you give a lot, you're a terrible saver. That's not responsible, that's irresponsible. That's not balanced, that's unbalanced. That doesn't honor me, it dishonors me. You need to start saving for the future. For some of you, God might go like, you need to stop spending so much. I mean, maybe it's not even an issue of not being able to afford it. Maybe it's just an issue of like, have you seen the basement? Like, it's stacking up. Do you need 3 closets full of clothes? For some of you, it might just be God going, you know what? If you were to add up all the time that you spend in front of the computer looking for things to need, it wouldn't be the way you spend your money that you would be convicted by. It would be the way you spend your time that you'd be convicted by. Some of you, maybe there's some prized possession, and it's not that God is against prized possession. It's not that he's against collections. It's that he's against things getting in the way of your heart. For some of you, it might be like, you need to deal with this thing. You got to sell some stuff. I don't know how it's going to translate, but my challenge is, if we're going to honor God with everything, it starts by praying that prayer, Lord, how do I honor you with everything? Do I need to look at my savings again? Do I need to look at my giving again? Do I need to look at my purchasing again? Do I need to move beyond just my paycheck and begin to think about all the other areas, inheritance and inheritance and taxes and all those other things that kind of trickle in that we don't account for, and then not just my money, but my stuff? I don't know how this is going to translate for you. I just know that when I look at David's life, he seems to recognize, and we can trace this theme into Paul's life and into Jesus' life, that there's a healthy perspective that comes with going, God, it all comes from you. It all belongs to you. My job is to honor you with everything. So that's my challenge. Will you just take a week and pray that prayer? God, what does it look like? Some of you are going like, Adam, I'm a college student. I don't have any money. That's exactly the point. We're not just talking about money here. What does it look like for you to honor God with everything? We just pray that prayer for a week. And listen, if you don't think God hears or answers prayer, I dare you. Just pray that prayer for a week and see how he might direct you. Now, there is one catch. And the one catch is that to pray that prayer requires that you surrender your stuff to God. It requires that you loosen the grip. It requires that you acknowledge, like, Lord, it's not mine, it's yours. I didn't earn it, you gave it to me. Yeah, I understand there's this mysterious partnership, and I want that to continue, but Lord, ultimately, at the end of the day, it's yours. And I think where those of us who have been around church for a while are at a disadvantage is it's really easy to think that because you budget the 10% or the 12% or whatever the percent is, that you live with that. You can be as tight-fisted about 50% as you can about 100%, can't you? And there's this, like, God, here's your money. No, don't reach across the table. I will give it to you. Like, keep your hands, like we're at the bank teller or something, you know? Like, no, yeah. Here's what I recognize in myself, and as I have this distinct privilege of sitting across the table from people like you and just hearing their stories, well, what strikes me is when you surrender your money, you have the chance and to honor God with everything. Further, what strikes me is that it seems that the older you get, the more sense this makes to you. But the catch is, the older you get, the less time you have. This is just the facts. So will you pray the prayer? Will you spend a week just saying, God, this isn't about money, this isn't about stuff, this isn't about collections, this isn't about savings, this isn't about retirement. God, what does it look like for me? What does it look like for my family and I? What does it look like for us to honor you, not with a percentage, but with all of it? That, I want to suggest, is the proper reference point. When we start there, then we can start getting balanced. Let me pray, and we'll call it a morning. God, we're so grateful for Jesus, Lord, and I think he testifies louder than anything else that you don't want anything from us, you want something for us. Everything about the cross, everything about everything about the resurrection, God, it all demonstrates that you're a God who's after our heart, you're after our character, you're after our being, and you identify stuff that gets in the way of that. Lord, we're meddling this morning, and so I pray that you would lead and guide as you're so capable of doing. I pray that you would help us find time to listen, find time to conversate with you about this. God, we want to honor you with everything. And it's in your Son's name that we pray. Amen.
For more information on Narrate Church, visit www.narratechurch.org or download the mobile app, now available for iPhone and Android.